Welcome to Dear Watchers, an omniversal comic book podcast where we do a deep dive into the multiverse.
We are traveling with you through the stories and the worlds that make up the omniverse of fictional realities we all love. And your Kangs on this journey are me, Guido.
And me, Rama Rob. And what is new, Guido, in our little section of the multiverse?
So last week on our episode, if you didn't listen to it, we explored the Tangent Comics universe, a sub-universe of DC, for the first time, taking that trip. And prior to that, we were in the Buffyverse for the first time with Buffy the Last Vampire Slayer. So we had some fun detours on our travels that we've never taken before. But now we are getting back into Marvel with our excitement for Quantum Mania. We have a few weeks that we're going to spend in Marvel's Omniverse, just like old times. And we have some neat ways to do that, some fun characters we're going to explore that we think are going to show up. And so we have lots of MCU predictions for everybody.
And I know this is an audio podcast, but we decided for every episode we're going to dress up like a different Kang. What are you wearing right now, Guido? Because no one can see you.
Kangaroo. There's a Kang from the parody comic. Kangaroo.
Yes, from the Spider-Ham universe.
Yes. So I'm currently dressed as a kangaroo.
Yeah, well, I'm Rama Rob, so I've got my Egyptian headdress on. Maybe problematic in 2023.
I'm going to say yes. That's not okay.
Well, we also want to make sure that you all know that we are also on Ko-fi, so you can support us there as a patron. It really helps us build this community. And if you could please take a moment to leave us a review right now. So just like Kang, we will freeze time. So stop, pause, and do that right now.
Make sure to come back.
Okay, we've unfrozen time, and with that, if you're joining us for the first time, we have 3 sections of our travels today: origins of the story, what inspired this other reality, exploring multiversity, we dive deeper into our alternate universe, and pondering possibilities, we examine the impact and what's followed or coming in the future. And with that, dear watchers, welcome to episode 83, and let's check out what's happening in the Omniverse with today's alternate universe. And we are asking this is an interesting question. What if Kang tried to kill himself over and over again?
Eek. Content warning. So this is a little bit unique for us, which is fun because we're spending most of our time in the 616. So even our trip through Multiversity, our second segment, where we usually focus on an alternate universe that is divergent from the core universe, here we are in the 616. But we spend a bit of time and our story kicks off on Earth 267 with this only known appearance in the story that we get into. We also see some other Earths on screen, more on that in our summary, and of course there are the Kangs, and the Kangs are from many other universes, including Prime Kang, who is not a 616 Kang. Speaking of Kang, we're going to dive deep into the origin in our first segment, but just some quick background. Of course, this is a character that first appeared as Rama Tut in Fantastic Four number 19 from October 1963 by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. First appeared as Kang, later to be retconned as Rama Tut, of course, in Avengers number 8 from September 1964.
Yes, and outside of comics, Kang has appeared in many animated forms, including the Avengers Assemble, where he was portrayed by the iconic voice actor Steve Blum. Of course, he's now portrayed in the MCU by Jonathan Majors, and more on that later. And then in 2009, IGN ranked him as the 65th greatest comic book villain of all time. And in 2022, CBR said he was the 7th most important Marvel villain. So maybe you agree with those rankings or disagree with them.
I think he's climbing up that list as we speak.
It does seem that way. So, Guido, what is your background with Kang and his many other incarnations?
I don't know how to explain this because as a Marvel reader for so long, I know Kang. I've read so much Kang, and I cannot understand Kang. it does not click in my head. So I've never been a big fan of the character because I find it really convoluted. And I love retcons. I love linking of different stories that are disparate, and we're going to actually talk about that in one of our Origins issues when we go a little out of the box with that. But it still hurts my head. Anything you read about Kang, it just doesn't make sense. I don't get it. So I'm familiar with Kang, but I don't know. I don't think anyone can be a Kang expert, quite honestly. So I know a lot about Kang, but it still doesn't make sense. How about you?
I always, growing up, was a big villains fan, so I loved reading about him in the handbook, and he would pop up in certain things, but he seems like, at least when I was reading comics, not a character that was in heavy rotation, so I feel like I never read too much about him. I had a prose Marvel book focusing on different villains, and he had a story in there, and I was always a big fan of kind of also ancient Egyptian villains. I loved Stargate growing up, so I also loved like the Rama Tut things, and all the design of the character I think is always cool. I love the blue mask and the classic purple and green look of main Kang, but I also love the Scarlet Centurion outfit, which is also really cool. So I love that, but I felt I never really had a handle on his personality as a character, and I'd love to kind of dive deeper into that once we get into the issues as well.
Yeah, so let's do that.
Okay, we'll open up our time portal and journey back to the swinging 60s with this week's Origins of the Story.
Right now on this very show, you're going to get the answer to all your questions. Our amazing story begins a few years ago.
Up first is Avengers Volume 1, Issue number 8 from September 1964, called Kang the Conqueror.
And this is written by Stan Lee, though in the credits box, he is described as our answer to Victor Hugo. Illustrated by Jack Kirby, our answer to Rembrandt. Inked by Dick Ayers, our answer to Automation. Lettered by Sam Rosen, our answer to Artie Simek. And
I laughed out loud at
Stan.
that one, actually. I have
Artie
to say,
Simek?
the Artie
Yeah,
Simek
it's
one,
cute.
I made me laugh out loud. Yeah.
And it is edited by Stan Lee. Colors are probably by Stan Goldberg, not credited. We read this because it's the first appearance of Kang named Kang. So Rama Tut predates this, as we mentioned in our background. And of course, tons of the origin is not yet constructed. So, and we're going to get into Kang's origin, the later sort of retcons, in our next part of Origins. But right now, let's focus on this issue and his appearance and whether or not he has a personality.
He has a bit of a generic supervillain personality here that just...
See, I don't agree.
Mm-hmm.
I disagree. I think he has a great personality here. I think this is what Jonathan Majors, even though he was not Prime Kang in Loki, and we'll talk more about his performance, I think he captures the cockiness of this character. And it's clearly constructed to be that he is cockier than anyone we've ever met as a villain. Because his very first appearance, put away your childish weapons. They are no more than toys to me. Okay, I can see how that's generic. But 3 panels later, he's just chilling in a lounge chair with his legs crossed.
That is...
He does not care what is happening. He doesn't care that the Avengers are coming upon him. And I think that's really fun. I think that makes him... I mean, all of Marvel's villains had a lot of personality, which is why you like them. And every time we talk about them, we find that. But I think his is a little distinct in that. He just doesn't care. He's not stressed about it. He's not, like, going crazy. So I like that moment of his appearance, and I am we'll talk about the MCU later.
Yeah, I mean, the image of him floating on this invisible chair or a transparent anti-gravity seat is just great because he's super casual, a little fey there, which I kind of was thinking maybe would be more of his personality other places, which it's not really. But that sense of superiority, I think, is a common Marvel villain trait. I definitely think Magneto has it down the line, and then certainly I think the character, and we'll go into this more in our next segment, or our next issue, which is Doctor Doom. I think they have definitely a lot of shared DNA there.
Yeah. The difference, I think, what I see in Kang here, and of course my idea of him can't be separated from everything I know of him in the 50 years since this issue was published, 6 years, but he's relaxed. And that's one of the differences, I think, is that other villains are not relaxed. They're not at ease. They might be really confident, but they're not. And he is just chilling.
I guess having a sense of knowing what is going to happen in the future somewhat makes you more relaxed in that way.
Exactly. And his life, I mean, at this point in this issue, we do get a little of that background, that idea that he is from the year 3000. So, yeah, I agree. I think that he would not care that much. It makes sense to me. He thinks he has superior technology. Yeah.
The issue that he's traveled back because in the year 3000, basically all war has been defeated, and it's a very peaceful time, and he's like, this is boring. Like, you call him an adventurer here. I mean, I think it's probably darker than that, but the fact that he's then traveling to other times, that he then goes back to ancient Egypt and gets trapped there, but it's all coming from the fact that he basically is bored, I think, to what you kind of were saying. Like, he is almost this elite, effete character in that way, and wants entertainment. Yes, he wants to conquer, but probably more so than the conquering, he wants to have these playthings, which is not the case with, say, a Magneto or someone like that, who obviously has a true mission.
Yeah. So, the other parts of this issue that stood out to me as being fun/wacky, and a lot of them we're going to talk about in our third segment, because a lot of them I think link into, for me, what I think will come in the MCU, or what we've already seen hints of. But I think it's interesting the way Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne play a huge role in this story. They're sort of the front and center Avengers, I'd say, in this story. Cap and Thor and Iron Man are there, but especially Wasp trying to get into his armor and dismantle it, and Giant Man is the first one who grabs him and threatens Kang. So I thought that was interesting. And same with Rick Jones and his teenage gang.
Yeah, so you get
I love that he organizes the teenagers to take on Kang, and that's how they essentially defeat him, is because the teenagers disrupted his plans by telling him they were going to be a part of his crew and going up to his ship and then throwing down one of his weapons, which Kang is all worried it's broken. So meanwhile, Rick and one of the other teenagers are sneaking around the ship to free the Avengers. So it's really weird.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I know we've never spent too much time focusing on Rick Jones as a character. I know there's some what ifs that focus on him that we'll still have to do, but it was great here with this kind of whole teenage gang. And they, of course, look very 60s. One's wearing like a Letterman sweater and those kind of things, I think the same as like 60s movies too. Teenagers look like they're 40-year-old businessmen. Of course, the ones wearing like a hat that it's like, what teenager was wearing this hat even in 1964? But yeah, it's cool that it then is really up to them and to Janet to really save the day. And in fact, Thor especially kind of is thwarted at every possibility here when he throws his hammer and the hammer is just defeated, and then he gets turned back into Donald Blake at one point and can't escape from that. So yeah, Thor, especially the most, powerful probably of this group, is just always reduced. And Iron Man too, like at one point his suit stops working, so Tony's heart isn't really working then, and then so yeah, all the more powerful characters that we think of are really sidelined a lot in this issue.
Yeah, so I think it's a pretty straightforward issue. I think the issue itself is actually not that exciting. Like, Kang doesn't have much of a plan, and there's no twists, and even toward the end, I'd say it gets a little, it's just sort of these 6-panel pages, and there's lots of narration and dialogue. So it slows it down, the pacing and stuff. But the design of Kang, the characterization
we should talk
of Kang,
just real quick about, Kirby's art here, which is great. And I don't think Kang ever really looked like this going further. There's a close-up of his mask at one point, which frankly read as like a bondage mask.
It does very much read like a leather
later
mask,
it's much more
I don't know if that even exists
I don't know, yeah.
But
it's later so much more sci-fi, and here it really is creepy, and it's ultra Kirby because it's got the spikiness to it. And when we see, I think, some of his other minions in the other world, they're all super Kirby-esque, and his face is just disguised by this mask, which also gives us one of the best lines in the issue, which is our ongoing mini-series of Janet Van Dyne being the horniest character in comics, because when Kang first arrives and he's lounging on his invisible chair, they're all saying, okay, we're going to defeat him. Oh my gosh, his confidence is disturbing, Thor says. And Janet says, I'll bet he's not bad looking under that silly headgear he's wearing.
I wonder if we'll get to see Michelle Pfeiffer say that to Jonathan Majors. I would like that. So yeah, it's a fun start to a character that goes much further. It's a fine issue, very typical Silver Age. But let's add in a part for this segment that we've never done before. So what are we looking at next?
This is Omniverse, the journal of the Journal of Fiction Reality from 1979. This is issue number 2. Sadly, 2 of 2, though Kat Gruenwald is still trying to locate that third issue notes that she has, so we can't wait for that to come out. So this is, of course, a journal of writing, and the specific piece we're going to focus on is entitled The Lives and Times of Dr. Doom.
So this is the zine created by Mark Gruenwald. It's follow-up to the first 2 primer on fictional reality and treatise on fictional reality that he works on with his father. And this is in the 70s. He's a fan at this point. This is Omniverse. He's doing it and gets his job at Marvel through it. So he is the editor of this issue, the curator of everything in these 2 incredible issues that feel like they should be brought back today. Mm-hmm. This article, though, is by Frank Levici and Walt Hellstrom, and there's some art in it by Sam De La Rosa and Bill Neville. Frank Levici did write some Marvel comics later in the 90s and is a journalist still, and Walt Hellstrom I couldn't find much about, but it appears Hellstrom is a real name, which is kind of cool. I thought maybe it was a pseudonym.
Yeah, Damien's long-lost brother.
Yeah. So we read this because what this is it's an article, and we are going to post it on our coffee. But so you can go find it there if you need the text of this 12-page or so lengthy piece that is about trying to reconcile everything known through 1979 of the characters Doctor Doom, Ramatut, Scarlet Centurion, Immortus, and Kang. Because at this point, Kang has mentioned these 5 lives, or Immortus has mentioned these 5 lives that he led. And so this is attempting to understand things that are later explained, some of which are not even explained until a 2021 miniseries, actually. And so this article is like a academic study with tons of footnotes all about these different stories and how they might link, what the correspondences are, and then, of course, also what the contradictions might be, and it's just trying to make sense of it. So it's very cool that they're trying to do this academic study. And I just have to say from the opening, I like the opening quote: Dr. Doom, monarch of a nation; Ramatut, pharaoh of the Nile; Scarlet Centurion, ruler of an earth; Kang, conqueror of the future; Immortus, master of time. These are the men that try time's soul. And it's fun because the people writing this clearly know how convoluted this is, but they're really trying to understand it. And I enjoyed going through it. What did you take out of looking at this piece?
Yeah, I think it's a really great synopsis of where these characters were at the time. And I mean, the title, of course, is a little misleading because it's called The Lives and Times of Dr. Doom. And of course, it talks about Doctor Doom's potential connection to the Kang and other Kang-related characters.
Because at this point, and for some time, it wasn't clear if Kang was possibly Doctor Doom. So that's where that came from.
But yeah, it definitely focuses mostly on the various different versions of Kang. So yeah, I thought it was very helpful.
Yeah, exactly. Well, especially because of the way it's footnoted and it's so clear. So they'll go through and they'll actually pull quotes from the comics and use them again as if it's an academic study. So that's part of why Omniverse is so cool. It influenced the existence of this podcast, as we've talked about in our conversation with Kat Gruenwald. And so it's just neat to be able to find like textual evidence and see what people make of it and how it could work. And they pulled this one quote from Immortus that helped me understand what we're about to visit in our story up next, where Immortus says, "The death of one counterpart does not affect the lives of the rest of my legion of temporal counterparts one iota. The tree of my existence is ever growing, and once having been, always is." So this was just a really helpful, supportive, supplementary piece, even though some of what they cite, of course, is later retconned or negated, because this is still pretty early in the Kang backstory. But
Yeah, and
really
I think
cool piece.
one thing it highlighted for me, I think obviously this is especially true of the Immortus character, but I guess the character of Kang, and I think we'll probably see this more in the movie coming up. I mean, I think he does have a lot of nuance in terms of how evil he is, because different versions of him are more...
Yeah, have different agendas.
Yeah, Immortus is almost really like... I feel like a Galactus kind of figure where he does bad, but he's also like, it's not always doing bad. It's kind of in his nature. He's almost being a character that's living in limbo. He's almost really a neutral figure in some ways. And then even Kang, I think, kind of goes back and forth with that. And the Scarlet Centurion, who I knew from the Squadron Supreme issues.
No, that's a different Scarlet
but then,
Centurion,
but then that's a different one. So I didn't even know he was really existing in the 616. I thought he was just kind of on this other Earth. So it was really interesting just kind of getting a little bit of that backstory. He's probably of the various Kangs, the least known, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a fun piece. Go to our coffee to check it out. It's hard to track down these issues, but they are online on eBay and sometimes at Comic-Cons and stuff. And they are well worth anyone who's interested in the kind of stuff we talk about getting, because they are mapping out DC, Howard the Duck. They even bring in Sherlock Holmes. Like it's truly meant to be fictional reality. A better understanding of fictional reality. I wish the zine had continued, and I hope one day it does.
And if you're a fan of fonts, the opening font that they have on this, and the fonts throughout this whole Omniversity, are just excellent. And the little art illustrations that kind of complement this article are great, because it's really fun to kind of see someone who wasn't a Marvel artist and their take on it. Nice and early fan art, really.
Though they do use some panels. They do reproduce some panels in the text. So, yeah, very cool stuff. But that sets us up now to dive into our main event.
So we're rejiggering our time machine once again, and this time to exploring multiversity.
I am your guide through these vast new realities. Follow me and ponder the question, what if?
And this is The Avengers by Marvel Comics, Volume 1, issues number 267, 268, and 269 from May 1986 through July 1986. And these stories are entitled Time and Time Again, The Kang Dynasty, and The Once and Future Kang.
All right, and this is during the really undervalued, but definitely what the MCU is setting up era of Roger Stern on the book. So Roger Stern writes these issues, John Buscema pencils, though with some inks and finishing art by Tom Palmer, colored by Christy Seal, lettered by Jim Novak, edited by Mark Gruenwald. Ta-da! Lots of Gruenwaldian connections. So, all right. This is our alternate Earth. And again, it's a little unique for us because it's taking place core in the 616. Typically, we look at Earths outside of the 616. But this one, we decided to look at the 616, which kicks off, though, with a trip to Earth 267. So very briefly, we get to see an Earth where Storm flies down, having now been made a member of the Avengers. Very cool moment that for a second I was like, wait a second, this isn't real, right? This didn't happen. And then Colossus is getting the Presidential Medal for also being an Avenger, and Iron Man helped Colossus migrate from the Soviet Union. But it turns out that Iron Man is actually Kang in Iron Man's armor, sets off a nuclear bomb, ends up destroying this Earth 267. What this leads us to is the first appearance of the Council of Kangs. So we learn that there is this group of Kangs that try to monitor all of the divergent iterations of Kang and try to look at what they're doing and understand it. One of them, though, has gone rogue and is trying to kill all of the others. And over the course of these 3 issues, with lots and lots of tangents and sideways paths through limbo, not to be confused with the Hell Dimension, but the limbo that Immortus occupies, that is outside of time, we find that this Kang has killed all but one of the Kangs and is trying to get the Avengers to kill this last Kang so that he can be the ultimate Kang.
And he's wearing a cape, so we know he's like the big bad one.
Yes, he's added a little bit of flair to the outfit. Mm-hmm. And of course, this is also a team roster that, again, is very MCU. We have Captain Marvel, Namor, Captain America, Hercules, Wasp, and so
Black Knight, a very motley crew of Avengers. This was like definitely a variety that I had not been familiar with here.
But spoiler, and then we'll dig in deeper for sure into this story, but how it ends is that Ravonna slightly betrays him because she lets the Avengers escape, and then it turns out that this Ravonna that had survived, because the Ravonna we knew has died, and that the Kang knew has died. So she is working with Immortus, who is not actually dead. And so it turns out that it was Immortus who was trying to sort of purge of these evil Kangs, and Immortus, as you said, is not quite evil here. He doesn't have an evil agenda, but he lets the Avengers think he's a villain because he wants things to stay clear on the timeline, a little bit sacred timeliney. So that's an attempt to summarize what is a pretty complex 3 issues. The 3rd issue ends up with a ton of retelling of Kang's origin, retells his early appearances, retells his Rama-Tut stuff, his Scarlet Centurion stuff, and tries to tie it all together now with this new addition to his mythology of the Council of Kangs and this idea that all these divergent Kangs actually still exist. So I think that's a good summary and place for us to start our discussion. What did you think overall of these issues? You probably haven't read much Bronze Age Avengers.
No, I hadn't, and it certainly starts off with a bang, quite literally, because there's this nuclear explosion, which I think is quite the jarring start. And I, unlike you, was not familiar, again, as you said, with Bronze Age. So Colossus and Storm being there just didn't seem out of touch with me, and there's a little bit of Soviet politics in there, and then like this bomb goes off, and I'm like, whoa, my gosh, this is so interesting. And then what's so cool is like we get then we see the Council of Kangs, and the one Kang, our main Kang in his cape, is saying, well, no, you didn't succeed, other Kang, because by setting off that nuclear explosion, yes, you killed the Avengers, but then the United States thought the Soviets were attacking, so you basically killed the entire world. And in another alternate universe, the Kang didn't even get to explode the bomb. He's just killed right away. So definitely, I thought I liked how in depth it got into all these different versions of Kang and kind of seeing those multiple timelines, and certainly that stuff that we are now seeing in the MCU too.
Well, and what each of the Kangs has, even though most of them are not trying to kill the other ones, they all talk about like one of them refers to how each new divergent double is more ignorant than the one before. It makes me wish I'd never built a time machine.
Yeah.
And then the other one says most of them are so incompetent that they die in their own schemes. So like they all think they're the better one, which again we saw in that first issue, and we'll keep seeing in his appearances just how part of Kang is how superior he feels even to himself.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, and we'll go into this, I think, in our next section, but I mean, there's so much here that is, we're seeing those ramifications in the MCU, and a lot of, I think, the form of not necessarily Kang, but we saw a lot of these themes explored in Loki in terms of the different other versions and stuff like that. But the other thing that this reminded me a lot of, Guido, was I know we've only watched the TV show, not read the books, but is Foundation by Isaac Asimov, where there's the Empire are three versions of the same person, and there it's a clone. It's not.
That's true.
It's not it's not time travel, but they have that same kind of thing where one of them thinks they're better than the other, and like then there's some plots to within them to try to kill each other and that kind of thing. So I'm starting to get that. I was wondering if Gruenwald or Roger Stern was even maybe reading Asimov and sci-fi and kind of taking some of those concepts from there, because that goes back to the 40s even.
And Stan in the 60s when he starts, I mean, Stan is the one who makes Ramatut a Kang in the first place, so he might have been being influenced. And there is even that line in here where Captain America is telling Captain Marvel that Iron Man came up with this jargon of chronal displacement wave, but that actually the pulp writers of his boyhood would have just called it a time teleport rise. So there's even the explicit reference to pulp stories and like old school sci-fi. So I think you're right. They could easily have been influenced by Asimov or any number of other stories that had to do with chronal displacement and divergent selves and all of that kind of stuff that happens.
And then this is a concept too, right, with the Council of Kangs that's popped up in other things. Like, isn't there also a Council of Reed Richards? And I know on the Flash TV show there was a Council of Harrison Wells. So it definitely seems like it's a concept that people, I would imagine this was the first time, though. This is where maybe that stems from.
It might be. I mean, 86, I don't know. There could be some Silver Age stuff that was earlier than 86, but yeah, for sure, the Council of Reeds, that becomes a huge part of Secret Wars, and the modern Secret Wars and Hickman's run, that is really, for sure, influenced by this, and Kang is, of course, a Richards. So it makes sense that there would be that echoing of what we see here. And I think it's a fun 3-issue story to read. I think it's actually going to be really important for Kang fans to read this, and we'll get into the MCU fully in just a moment. But this feels like a really iconic 3 issues in Kang's legacy, because it is the first time we see that council. It is the first time we see him killing himself in these different versions, and the implications of multiple Earths and multiple Kangs. So I think it's a really important 3 issues. It's fun enough. It has a good pacing. It's still a little convoluted. Of course, it's simplified at this point. Marvel hasn't leaned into the multiverse, so they try to simplify it.
There's a very long stretch with the Space Phantom and different versions from the past, which was fun because we've covered that issue, the original issue, on this podcast. But it did feel a bit like they were filling pages and panels a little bit to me at that point, where it was like, okay, I still don't know quite what it actually means by them showing all of that.
Well, and it helps too that they created this version of Limbo, which is out of time. The Limbo, the Hell Dimension, is out of place. This is out of time. So in that they can put these different things and not have it actually mean anything. So yeah, they have this idea that Space Phantom has displaced people and they're all in limbo, the different earlier versions. And then of course that's where Immortus has been ruling over. So they do a good job of trying to make something really convoluted a little simpler, but it's still a lift in your brain.
And I think too, like the Kangs are really fun in this. They're really what's carrying it. And maybe because this is kind of a very odd version of the Avengers, they definitely seem like they're far in the background, and I kind of wanted a little bit more of their personalities to shine through here.
Well, there's a bit like you're getting what's cool about Stern's run, like a lot of 80s work and definitely like anything Mark had his fingers on. There's the soap opera element. So you're getting pieces of stories that are going to unfold later. So in this, Namor has just joined and there's these protesters outside. So that story is going to keep building of what Namor's role on the Avengers is. And then of course Captain Marvel is new on this and she tells her name for the first time to Captain America.
Yeah.
So
that's not the only thing new about her, though.
Yes,
she also has
hair.
She also has a new hair, because even Captain America, who's probably not the most, aware of these kind of things, I'm guessing, but he even says, "Say, you look great, Captain Marvel. Is that a new hairdo?" And she says, "Thank you. Yes, I thought it was time for a change." And this is probably really like updating, right? Because it was a little bit more 70s hairstyle right before this.
No, she hasn't existed for very long. She's pretty new at this point.
Oh, okay. So, yeah.
And the other thing I noticed too on the soapy note is you have Wasp actually telling Space Phantom. I liked this moment where she's like, "I'm not the Wasp you remember. I'm a much stronger version." So it's fun that like there's a little nod to just how absurd she was written in the 60s at times, as we've talked about, including a few minutes ago.
Yeah, and even in this issue, she comes across like the main character in this, which is interesting because that's what we said for the 60s
she's leading the
issue
Avengers,
as well.
So that's why.
Yeah, she definitely seems like she has more of a presence, more to do than some of the other characters like Black Knight, who's like barely in this really.
Yeah, well, you go story a few issues later, you'll zoom in on Black Knight, so it became an ensemble soap opera, which is very cool. And the art, of course, John Buscema is great.
Yeah,
even when
great
he's getting
art.
help from Tom Palmer inking it. So it's fun. Again, I think it's just a really, really important run. And before we talk about why, our alternate Earth in this is Earth 267. We barely see it. Do you want to go back to Earth 267?
Well, I think the whole world has blown up, so I don't think there's much to go back to. I did like the idea of them talking about what if Colossus, as this ex-Soviet, was joining the Avengers, this like super American team, and then and what the controversy would be there. I think that would actually be a fun standalone story that we actually explored, since the X-Men are like never really officially recognized as a team, right? So it's okay he's on that, but the Avengers, what's it mean to have like a Soviet? And maybe there's an even modern version of that we could explore. I don't know, but that would actually be an interesting story to me. Well,
and the fact that Iron Man brought the Rasputins over, so it's they're changing history slightly, which is interesting here. And yeah, I like it. And of course I like Storm opening the issue, and
it's fun because it even starts off like that it's all going to be about Storm. Like all the captions are just about how amazing
she
is,
else die in a nuclear
and then she gets blown up like
2 pages
later. Yeah.
All right, so let's keep going.
One last stop on our trip through time. It's Pondering Possibilities.
Will the future you describe be averted, averted?
So, Guido, what are we talking about for our Pondering Possibilities?
Well, since we did this episode in the run-up to Quantumania, we are going to just focus on the MCU, and we can talk a little bit about He Who Remains, the first Kang variant we meet in Loki, but I really more want to focus on what we think. We know that Kang is going to be an overarching villain for at least a while of the MCU. Whether or not he's the villain of Secret Wars or not is to be seen. But I want us to make some predictions, see what we think can be culled from these early stories, and figure out where we think things are going.
Yes, so we've got Loki, the TV show, specifically the episode For All Time Always from July 2021, and then Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania from February 2022, and that's of course
23,
yes,
this is
whatever
23.
year.
You wouldn't
too
be a
much
good
time
Kang.
travel. Too much time travel.
You're
yes.
you're more like Rama Tut, which is
Yes,
big, 'cause
exactly.
Rama
Yeah.
Tut's the one who thinks he's going back and then messes up the time
Yes.
and ends up somewhere else.
Only I just end up 1 year in the past, which probably doesn't really have much of an impact. And of course, those are going to be starring or have starred Jonathan Majors as Kang or some version of Kang.
Yes, with lots of great writers, directors, producers who made the Kang that we know. Specifically for that episode, it's Michael Waldron and Eric Martin, directed by Kate Herron. But there is a lot more hands are going to be on this character as soon as a few weeks from now. So let's start with Jonathan Majors' depiction, and then let's move into Quantumania and what we think we know from the trailer or our own predictions. So I loved Jonathan Majors instantly. You took a little while.
I still didn't love his performance. I think I'm more of an outlier there, but it was a little actorly, a little too many like ticks for me in that way. Yeah, so I didn't love his performance in Loki.
Well, I think what'll be really cool, and I'm assuming he has the acting chops. I mean, I don't know him that well. We watched a little bit of Lovecraft Country, but what will be cool about all the variants is seeing him play it slightly differently.
Yeah.
So He Who Remains was a really specific character, and when we meet Kang, he's not going to be like He Who Remains.
Yeah, I think
and I'm assuming Quantumania is gonna. I have zero doubt Quantumania is gonna have more than one Kang. I'll get to that in a moment, but I think we'll see him play these different variants, and he'll have to treat each one differently.
Yeah, I think in some part he wanted to probably do this kind of big, more swing for the fences, big, larger than life performance in Loki because it's only one episode. Because I would imagine, like you said, yeah, we're gonna see a very different version in Quantumania and maybe even going forward. So maybe he wanted those other versions to be a little bit closer to like his core personality, and that way he would start really big and then you can kind of always pull it in afterwards. So that would be just my thought that MCU or he had as an actor.
And I think it makes sense. I mean, He Who Remains is the last living creature in all eternity. So it makes sense if you we as human beings cannot even fathom that, of course.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to me that he's going to be acting in a way that doesn't make sense to us either, because it's like who knows? You wouldn't even be sane, of course, if you were human, but he's not, so it doesn't matter.
Do you think so? He's called He Who Remains in that episode, but a lot of people said, well, it's probably closest to Immortus because again, he's not quite a villain, but he's not quite a hero. The look
He Who
was
Remains
more
is
similar.
in the comics.
Oh, it's in the comics. So I was wondering why did they choose not to do Immortus, which is a more. Do you think that character will pop up in maybe future incarnations?
Immortus?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I think there's a chance Immortus is in Quantumania. If Immortus is not in Quantumania, then I think Immortus could be in Fantastic Four. I think we are going to get Immortus and Rama Tut, Jonathan Majors. I don't doubt that at all. And I do think it's going to be in Quantumania. I think reading Avengers 267 to 269 made me feel really strongly that could actually be the plot of Ant-Man and Wasp, because all we know, which is very little, is that we have in at least one scene Kang asking for help with something and potentially being trapped in the quantum realm. It makes sense to me that he is battling other versions of himself at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that is potentially what we see unfold. That's where, also being struck by the first issue, how much Hank and Janet had to do with the origin. It made me think, oh, that works perfectly. Hank and Janet are going to have something to do with the origin. We know Janet has a lot of experience in the quantum realm that we never learned in the first two movies. She refers to it having happened, but we don't ever find out what exactly happened to her in the quantum realm, what made her a warrior. So for all we know, she's already interacted with Kang, this one or another one. And so I think that we will see Immortus and that we will see many versions of Kang. And I think it'll probably be in this movie, but I guess it could be being held for other stuff.
Yeah, I think it made sense to me that they kind of introduced this concept with the character of Loki, a character we know very well, and also a character that would make sense to also have different versions of himself before they really introduced the concept with Kang, because it was almost like a soft opening of there, like, okay, we get to kind of see all the different versions. Sometimes they look like the person we know, sometimes they look like Richard E. Grant, all those kind of things. So I think it was very smart of them to kind of introduce it with a character we were already familiar with before they do it with Kang.
Yeah, and Wanda, of course, had variants too. So we've gotten a few different a little sense of what variance means and what it means to have divergent people who are like yourself elsewhere. So, yeah. What is one of your biggest predictions for Quantumania? Kang related, ideally, for this episode, but maybe not.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, I think seeing seeing Rama Tut, I think, would be really interesting. Going back to Egypt, maybe tying that in with Moon Knight there as well, because there we also get Egypt, ancient gods, different personalities, of course, also with Moon Knight. So there's almost a connection there as well. I think that would be really interesting. And then kind of beyond Kang, I think my other prediction is that really, I think we've started to see this already, but seeing how time and the variance will play a role in ultimately kind of the long-term strategy of the MCU, and just in terms of cast and stuff like that. So as people are getting older or their contracts are expiring, like, how will we use time to like recast some of these characters or even have kind of a what if universe where we're able to explore stories outside of the mainstream MCU continuity. And I think we're already starting to see kernels of that, but I bet I'm thinking this movie will will definitely introduce that even further.
Yeah, I agree. There's also been long time rumors since this movie was even in pre-production. They're the kind of thing where I don't know if it's quite rumors or if it's speculation that starts getting quoted as rumor because so many people think it, that we'll meet the Fantastic Four here. That the Fantastic Four could be in the quantum realm and could actually be a superhero team from the 60s. So how likely do you think that is?
I think it's very likely. I think
I agree, especially the Easter eggy piece to me is, I think, why the MCU resonates so much with comic fans. There's so many reasons, of course, that have been talked about to death, but one thing is, I think they do always find pieces from the books and pull them out, even if they're going to change them or transform them. They find something about that character's origin or first appearance or first major story arc that can show up in the plotting. And so to have Kang exist, if we treat Kang's first appearance as the Rama Tut in Fantastic Four, then it has to be bound up in the Fantastic Four. And then, of course, Doctor Doom and him are so intertwined. You can't disentangle those. Even if this story started being plotted before they owned Fox, I still think they'd go back and start to plant seeds. And so whether or not there's seeds in Quantumania or the full on just here's the team, boom, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I well, on one hand, like, I think they could take the same route that they did with the Tom Holland Spider-Man, which is like, we're going to skip the origin story. We've seen the Fantastic Four origin story too many times. And also, I just love the concept of having a group from the 60s because it just opens up a whole new way to write those characters, especially Ben Grimm, who is kind of a character who speaks in an antiquated style. So just having that from the 60s. And also, then what does that mean for people's memories? What does like, say, Scott Lang even remember them? Or did they work with Hank and Janet, and maybe we just never really have heard of them, or have they existed in like another way or had this kind of wiped? And that opens up so many other possibilities to introduce things like the X-Men or other stuff that might be out there that for some reason we just don't know.
Yeah, I agree. And
I think the biggest go ahead. Oh, I was going to say
I have one last prediction, so you go.
Oh, okay. But not a prediction, but I think my biggest question will be, how will the Jonathan Majors portrayal of Kang, or how the MCU is going to use him, how will that stand out from an eventual Doctor Doom portrayal? Because as we've talked about, and as the Omniversity article is all about, the characters have lots of similarities. They hide their faces. They have all this advanced technology. They might even be related. So how are you going to make those two characters that have so many similarities different? And they're obviously setting up Kang to be like this big villain, but as we've talked about before on this podcast, I mean, if you had to say one person who's the arch villain of all of Marvel, it would be Doctor Doom. So he has to come at some point, and I'm just be curious how they make those stand out, because that has been some ongoing problem sometimes with Marvel, where their villains have just not been nearly as good as they are in the comics. They don't have that different spark of their personality, so I'll be curious how they tackle that. What do you think?
I don't think that's true anymore. I think that was an argument a long time ago.
Well, tell that to Ethan Hawke on Moon Knight.
I don't know. I think it's hard to say, because frankly, they could make Jonathan Majors Victor Von Doom.
I was wondering about that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The way that the Kang and Doom Nathaniel Richards ancestry family tree is so linked that they could, obviously they're going to simplify it no matter what they do. So there's either going to be like, they'll either be the same person or there's going to be no connection, because it's so convoluted. I think that it's an all or nothing kind of thing in the Richards family tree. Mm-hmm. So I agree that how they create Doom is going to be an important question, but I also think there's just the possibility that he is Doom. I think
that's very true.
Was believed for a long time that was going to be true. We've also talked about the cross-racial casting of the Fantastic Four, and we've had a movie that did that with some characters, had Johnny Storm at least be not white. And so if they were playing with the cross-racial casting again in the Fantastic Four story, maybe Doctor Doom is the way to go.
Yeah, and I think he could play both characters, because we've seen Kang without his mask on in a lot of the trailers. But the one thing about Doom, which I hope they stay true to, is like you never see Doom's face. And I think almost showing it on The Mandalorian, it's like, it can work, because I think often the MCU movies way too often are like having people without their masks on because they want to see, Tom Holland's face. That's what they're paying for. But I hope like they go, okay, we're going to have Doom in the mask all the time, and that could make the same actor could play both characters, because it's just going to be a little less confusing to us as the viewer. Oh, there's Jonathan Majors without the mask, and there's Jonathan Majors as Doom. So I could totally see it happening.
Yeah.
What's your last prediction?
My last prediction is a little bit of a surprise and sets up our sequel, because I think that is very safe to say that the Young Avengers are here. Now, a lot of people, it's not a surprise. I'm not some brilliant speculator that the Young Avengers are coming, right? We all know that they're coming. We've already met Isaiah Bradley. We've already met Kate Bishop. We already know Cassie Lang. We now know Kang. So We know that there is casting or speculation of casting for at least Wiccan. We have the setup of Wanda's children. So we have all of the ingredients. And of course, they're going to come together at some point. I think it's going to be in Quantumania.
And yeah, because I
and it could even be sort of the stinger. I don't know that it's going to be a large part of the plot, but I don't think this is going to tease the Young Avengers anymore. I think the Young Avengers are going to be here by the end of this movie.
Yeah, I think that's a good guess. But Guido, what about someone like me who doesn't know too much about the Young Avengers? How would I learn more about them?
On next week's episode,
when we
go into the Young Avengers.
Oh, so, how convenient. Yes. I didn't even realize.
So that is a wrap, dear watchers. Thank you for listening. I have been Kang Guido.
And I have been Rama Rob.
And the reading list is in the show notes.
You can follow us on social
harmony,
like all the Kangs. We're the Council of Kangs, and you can follow us on social media at Dear Watchers.
Leave a review wherever you listen. We'll be back soon for another trip through the multiverse.
And in the words of Awatu, keep pondering the possibilities.